Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Game of Thrones Season 5 prediction video. I'll be spreading my Season 5 predictions over 2 videos. This video, the first of 2, will be about the pacing I think the show will take relative to the books. This video is spoiler free provided you've seen up to Season 4 of Game of Thrones. The next video I'll talk more specific predictions of what I think will happen in Season 5 based off of what happens in the book. So that video will be spoiler heavy as it directly refers to stuff that happened in the books but hasn't occurred on the show yet. However, this video is pretty safe unless you're very, very touchy and you don't want to know absolutely nothing about the books. However, I don't give any specifics away in this video, so it's pretty safe. So, last year, around this time, when we were waiting for Season 4 to come out, there were a lot of Season 4 prediction videos and blogs, and my opinion on them was they were a bit unrealistic with how fast they predicted the show would move, and expected the show to move at a much faster rate than it did. I saw some predictions predicting stuff that happened in King's Landing at the end of Book 4 to happen in Season 4, when in fact Season 4 only covered up to Book 3 as far as King's Landing goes. I even saw a prediction that Davos would go into his Book 6 storyline, even beyond the cover stuff in the book that hasn't even been released yet. When Davos mostly stuck to his Book 3 storyline in the show during Season 4. So all sorts of crazy predictions that seem to disregard either the order of certain events needed to occur or the pace that the show has traditionally set over the first 3 years of its run. So that's mainly what I want to talk about in this video, pace. Comment I commonly heard from book readers is that the show is moving at a really fast pace. I couldn't disagree more, and I think the pace of the show has been decidedly slow, particularly over Season 3 and 4. Whereas Season 1 was an adaptation of Book 1, Season 2 was an adaptation of Book 2. Book 3 was spread over Season 3 and 4, and although this worked well for some storylines, others suffered because the timing was a bit different, such as Arya's storyline, who most of her Book 3 storyline was used in Season 3 because she needed to be at the Red Wedding, and they wanted to have the Red Wedding at the end of Season 3, which left very little of her Book 3 storyline left for Season 4. So instead of skipping ahead to her Book 4 storyline, they stretched and dragged out her storyline with the Hound and gave her all this other stuff to do in Season 4 so she would not get too far ahead. And in fact, I would say all of Season 3 was stretched out and moved at a very slow pace. I had not read the books when I first watched Season 3, and even I thought it was moving really slow. I have a friend who actually stopped watching the show. She gave up on the show during Season 3 because she felt it was just too slow and too boring and nothing was happening. And although Season 4 moved a bit quicker than Season 3, it still had a really slow pace. Much slower than all these aforementioned predictions that were out before it aired. I, however, did predict that the show would move that slow and knew those prediction videos were wrong. In fact, the show had moved even slower than I predicted, because I predicted the battle for the wall would happen in like episode 7 or 8, and that Tyrion would kill Tywin in episode 9. But I turned out to be about an episode earlier on both accounts. Whereas other predictions I saw thought that Tyrion would kill Tywin by mid-season, Oberyn would fight the mountain by like episode 5, and the Battle of the Wall would be in like episode 6. It's true that they could have moved at that pace, and in some people's opinions should have moved at that pace. But I knew that they wouldn't, because the pace of Season 3 has set. For them to move at such a fast pace would be a huge shift in the pace the series moves. And that would result ultimately in bad writing. Since I have faith in the writers of the show, I knew they would not do anything so sloppy, so I knew that they would go at a slowish pace in order to fully explore the characters and their interactions the way that the show does a great job of doing, rather than simply stringing a bunch of events together. So the reason I bring this up now, well, lately I've been seeing a lot of Season 5 predictions that reminded me a lot of these Season 4 predictions, where people expect them to go through 2 full books and beyond in one season. I find these to be a bit unrealistic and not taking into account precedents the show has set for pacing. Now, when I do my next video, when I get into specific predictions, I'll be surprised if I get at least 50% of those predictions right, because I had a habit of making wrong predictions for Season 4. However, as far as pacing goes, I expect to be dead right, just like I was for Season 4. And if anything, the show would move even slower than I think it will. And I think it will move much slower than a lot of other people do. I read an interview with George R.R. Martin. The interviewer asked him a question that was something, that assumed that books 4 and 5 would be completely covered next season, which I think is it's a false assumption. It's a loaded question, because I don't think it's going to be the case. Part of the reason I think some people are making these ridiculous fast-paced predictions is because of the assumption that Game of Thrones will be finished in 7 seasons. This is based off of what the showrunners Dan and Dave said in some interviews. However, what they said in the most recent interviews is that the season will go for 7 or 8 seasons. And in fact, that's what they're quoted as saying the most, 7 or 8. Even if they say 7 sometimes, other times they say 7 or 8, so it's clear that they're a bit not completely decided. And ultimately, that they just don't, mainly the point they're trying to get across is that they just don't want the show to go on forever. They have to have some sort of end date in mind. But it's obvious from their shifting of the numbers from 7 to 8, and sometimes they even mention 9, that they haven't decided on an exact number yet, and this is still fluid. I think that those who take this number as being carved in stone are barking up the wrong tree, especially because more recently they're more often it's quoted as saying 7 or 8. So let me make a prediction now, and I'm sticking to it. Game of Thrones will have at least 8 seasons. I am 100% certain about this. I've never been more certain about anything in my life. I would say the possibility of aliens landing on planet Earth in the next 20 years is more likely than the possibility that there will not be 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. That's how certain I am. Now, what makes me so certain, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. What makes me so certain is the thing I've been talking about in this video, pacing. I submit because the way Season 3 and 4 have been paced, they have already passed the point of no return in order to do Game of Thrones in 7 seasons and to do the source material justice. So, in my opinion, that ship has already sailed. The 7-season ship is gone. At this point, they have to do 8. That if they wanted to do the show in 7 seasons, then they would have paced Season 4 more like those other predictions I mentioned earlier, have Tywin die about halfway through the season. But because they didn't, they have too much source material to get through to keep the slow character-based pace that they have for the show for its entire run. I submit, in order to finish the show in 7 seasons, they would have to move at a pace much faster than the one they've been moving at, in which case quality would inevitably suffer. And I have faith in the showrunners to not sacrifice quality in favor of a faster pace. Just like I did when I predicted the Season 4 pace. And just like that, I was right about the pace of Season 4. So I do expect to be right about the pace of the remaining 4 seasons. Another concern people have about why they might wrap it up in 7 instead of 8 is because the fear that Game of Thrones will lose popularity And personally, that's why I think D&D are saying 7 or 8, not just straight out 8, is because they never know in terms of practicality if they'll be allowed to do an 8th season, but they know that the popularity should be able to buy them at least 7, as HBO has already renewed their contract up to season 6. However, I think people who think this just don't realize how incredibly popular Game of Thrones has become. It is HBO's most popular series ever. It is unbelievably popular, to the point I say that even if its viewership drops, it will remain completely viable to continue. In fact, I would say the chances of it losing that much popularity in 3 years is incredibly low. Like I said, don't underestimate how popular this show is, but anything's possible, which is why I think D&D are saying 7 or 8. But if Game of Thrones popularity holds for season 5, or if it even increases, I bet you anything that D&D will go from saying 7 or 8 to just 8. So now let me explain the nature of books 4 and 5, A Feast for Crows and A Dance for Dragons, for those of you who may not have read the book. These books occur concurrently in time, where book 4 covers certain characters and book 5 covers other characters' journeys that are occurring at the same time. A Feast for Crow covers events in King's Landing, the Riverlands, Dorne, the Iron Islands, and Bravos, whereas A Dance with Dragons covers events occurring in the north of the Wall, and in Essos, including Meereen. And at one point, A Dance with Dragons catches up to the events of The Feast for Crows and starts including characters from that book and moving their storylines further. So, in the show, they're not simply going to skip Tyrion, Jon Snow, and Daenerys for a season, so it's pretty much been confirmed the next season will combine events from both A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. And to further this, I predict that season 5 and 6 will be used to cover both books. Since both books are happening concurrently, they can't do a season 5 for book 4 and a season 6 for book 5. So more like season 5 will cover the first half of both books, and season 6 will cover the second half of both books. There has been some websites out there that have already stated this is definitely the case, and it makes the most sense to me because it contains, shows that traditionally do one book per season, with the exception of A Storm of Swords, where they did over 2 seasons. In fact, in March interview with Vanity Fair, George R.R. Martin suggested that the show could take 3 seasons to cover A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, since A Dance with Dragons is just as long of a book as A Storm of Swords was. However, I don't think the show will do this. I think A Storm of Swords was the exception because it is a fan favorite book, and is very densely packed with a lot of material, whereas A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons features a lot of characters and storylines that I think will be cut for the show because it splinters off into too many directions. And that might work for a book, but wouldn't translate well for a show. So I feel that's how they could do it in 2 seasons rather than 3, as Martin suggests. But I find predictions that both books will be sped through in 1 season to be a bit ridiculous. There's no precedent for the show, for that, because the show has always moved at a slower rate than that. So why would they start now? So let me lay out my prediction to how I think the remaining 4 seasons will be laid out in regards to the corresponding book. So season 1 covered book 1, season 2 covered book 2, season 3 covered the first 3/4 of book 3, season 4 covered the remainder of book 3 and introduced some elements from book 4 and 5. Season 5 will cover most of book 4 and half of book 5. Season 6 will cover the rest of books 4 and 5 and introduce some elements of book 6. Season 7 will cover the rest of book 6 and perhaps introduce elements of book 7. And season 8 will cover the rest of book 7. And if there is a book 8, as Martin says there could be, then there might be a season 9 that would cover that. So, that leads me to my next point, which is the show surpassing the books. As most of you will know, books 6 and 7 haven't been released yet, and we don't know if they'll even do a book 8. All the speculation is that book 6 will be released sometime in the next couple of years. However, at the rate Martin tends to write books, that puts book 7 as a long way off. So even by my timetable, book 6 may come out before the show fully covers it, but the show would most definitely get into book 7 material before it comes out, perhaps even years before it was released. Which leads me to another common theory I've seen floating around the net, which I entirely disagree with, that is that the show will completely make up its own ending and not follow the books at all for the last couple of seasons. This theory seems to be based on the mistaken impression that the books have to be printed, published, and open to the public before the showrunners can even start to write scripts based off of that books, which is a false assumption. George R. R. Martin is involved in the show and has already had intense discussions with the showrunners Dan and Dave about how the series ends. Every interview Dan and Dave has given indicated that they know what the ending is, and that it is heavily implied they intend to follow it, because they've said stuff like, it's an ending we're happy to work towards, which means they are going to have the same ending. Which already discredits most of the theories, which discredits the theory above. However, George did mention at this stage he doesn't know the details of the ending, just has a rough outline which he shared with Dan and Dave, apparently before season 4 aired. He went through every single major character's journey with them so they know where they end up. If Dan and Dave plan on simply disregarding the books at some point and making up their own ending, there would be no reason to do that. However, there is something George R. R. Martin referred to as the butterfly effect, which described that every change the show makes will lead to an even bigger change further down the line, which means the change effect is cumulative. Every change they make will lead to more changes, so that as each season goes by, the changes will get bigger and bigger. So that by the time the show gets to the final season, it could end up looking very different from the book it's based off of. However, I still believe that it will follow all the major beats from that book and will not leave the books entirely. Although it will look much more different compared to the books that it's based off of than earlier seasons. For example, for people who are complaining a lot about about things in season 4 that happened in the books and not the show, and the show going a different direction, you people are going to be very unhappy with the remaining 4 seasons because it's only going to get worse. The changes are only going to get bigger. But saying that, the show's not going to leave the books entirely. I think this theory mainly started going about after episode 4 was aired this season, in which there was a scene with the White Walkers, and you see their palace, and you see them turning like a baby into a White Walker, and all the books readers start freaking out because this material isn't in the books yet. So they're assuming this is material that they haven't seen, that they're already included. And also in this episode, they introduced this Crasher's Keep storyline, which was totally not in the books. So a lot of book readers were freaking out about that. So, to me, I think people just getting overly excited about every little change in the book, and so they're coming up with this crazy theory. Well, the show's going to leave the book entirely, but if you look at it, the show actually did not change that much. So again, I'll cite precedent. In season 4, every time I predicted the show would make a change from the book, it actually followed the book more closely than I thought. Before season 4 started, I made a list of 14 major plot points in the remainder of A Storm of Swords. Out of those 14, 3 were not in this season. However, 2 of them will very most likely appear in season 5, or almost guaranteed to appear in season 5, leaving 1 that has been pretty much confirmed that will not happen in the show at all. So that's 1 out of 14 didn't occur. I said the show follows the main plot points of the books very closely. 3 that didn't occur, which I didn't think. 3 that did occur in the show, which I didn't think would, was Jorah being exiled by Daenerys, Tyrion killing Shay, and Arya leaving the Hound for dead. I thought that the show had changed those characters too much to follow the books, but the show found other ways to accomplish the same thing. Instead of Jorah being ousted by Barristan Selmy, who's hiding his true identity in the books but not in the show, he was ratted out by Tywin Lannister. Instead of Tyrion murdering Shay in the books, in which they have a completely different relationship, he kills her in self-defense. The show found different ways to accomplish the same major plot points in the books, and I strongly believe they will continue to do so right up until the end. As far as my season 5 prediction goes, those of you who's read the books may be wondering, what about Sansa and Brand? They barely have any storyline left. How can they do another full 2 seasons without getting into book 6 stuff? Or, if they're going to spread books 4 and 5 over 2 seasons, what climactic moments will they have in season 5? Well, I'll address those questions and a lot of other specifics in my next video, which I will give specific predictions of season 5, and that will be a spoiler-filled book reader only video. I'll put a link in the description alone, but you should only check that out if you have read the books. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching, and please like and check out some of my other videos.